As you're unpacking this idea of the inner child, how do you see this through a biblical lens and help people maybe who aren't familiar with these kind of concepts realize that we're not going off on the deep end psychologically, but this is just kind of a normal human experience that we would all benefit from understanding better?
The word psychobabble, something that comes
Yep.
up every once in a while.
Yep.
You hear that. But you know what? Let's first take a look at why the inner child, why it is not how it is not from a biblical perspective. Okay. First and foremost, one, it's not an excuse for any destructive behaviors. And it doesn't replace that idea, the concept of sin or accountability. We are accountable. We have to own our stuff. The inner child model basically is a therapeutic tool that helps to provide a rationale for someone's behavior. It doesn't give an out for why that person did what they did. So the inner child also, from a biblical perspective, is not a repressed version of ourselves. Okay, it's not that they would refer to it. People who've done other inner child models look at that kid and say, "Oh, that's the true self. You're buried." My inner child model is not. That's not the true self. Okay, that is not my kid. My kid is scared. He's lonely. He's confused. He's filled with all of these painful emotions that are not going to go away, and he doesn't know how to deal with them. The reason he doesn't know how to deal with them because nobody showed him how. My inner child also doesn't have the power to set us free. Okay, that's Jesus' role. Okay,
Amen.
that is
Yeah,
not my inner
totally.
child. My inner child wants one thing: comfort. He wants the comfort from this frightening, negative emotions and feelings that he's going through. And he doesn't have the power to transform us. That is not what he does. He is nothing more than a subconscious representation of our unresolved childhood pain points that still haunt us today. Now, what he does have the power to do, he has the power to increase our anxiety level when he attempts to correlate something from the past with some sort of negative event that happened right now. And when that anxiety level of ours increases, our anxiety, right, it rises. That then leads to an increase in compulsiveness, and an increase in compulsiveness is ultimately going to lead to an increase in the risk of poor decision making.
It is interesting. One of the things, and I think when this question comes up from Christians, sometimes we wish we had just like a verse that's like, oh, let's just right here. It's perfect. It's clear right here. But I think for me, the more that we've had conversations, the more I've learned about this whole process is that God designed our brains in a very specific way. And our brains, like our bodies are intended to, when we're in pain or when we experience trauma, we react. And that is a God-given ability. I mean, that's how we stay alive. Like if you get hurt doing something, it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to do that again because I don't want to get hurt because that's not good for me. But I think that there is something to be said about the way that science is now showing how God designed our brains from the beginning to internalize trauma and the messages and what we believe and how that plays out in our daily lives. And so I wouldn't say that that's like, hey, that's where you go for like proof of a biblical model. But I think you can still make a case that like God, is weaving us together in our mother's womb, including our brain and our body and the way it reacts to trauma and pain in life.
Absolutely. I mean, because the inner child model is a trauma model. And what it does, it helps people to answer the why question. Why does sex have a stronghold on my life? And you could take the word sex out and you could put anything else in.
Yeah,
Why does
absolutely.
depression, anxiety, why does alcoholism, put anything in there? And it's that self-reflection, if you look at that, that's what's very biblical about the inner child model. If we want to go to a verse, I can actually go to Second Corinthians that talks about examining ourselves.
That's
We
good.
are told, and again, there we're told to examine ourselves to make sure that we're in the faith. But it's like that with everything. We need to test what's going on within us because just like I understood when I was told, oh, you have an avoidant, attachment disorder. I was then empowered. I was empowered to make real changes in my life because now I knew what was going on. I wasn't just a womanizer, a player, a pervert, whatever. No, there was something that was wrong, and it was from my emotional base, and I needed to uncover that. And that's how this whole inner child thing started to develop.
Yeah.
Yeah. As you're sharing, Eddie, the verse that came to mind for me is the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians saying that when I was a child, I thought like a child, I acted like a child, I reasoned like a child. But when I became an adult, I put childish ways behind me. And I think a lot of what we're discussing here is the need for us to mature in all areas of life. And I remember in my own story how helpful that was for me to disarm shame, because when I thought of my struggles with pornography as primarily a sin issue, and it is sin, I don't want to discount that, but when I thought of it only through that lens, there was a lot of shame of I do wrong things, I make bad choices, maybe because I'm a bad person, shame on me. But through this lens of maturity, it's like, oh, maybe there's parts of me that haven't been trained or taught how to mature. And I've gotten stuck in immaturity in that emotional, relational, or even how I think sexually. And I think a lot of people can resonate with that because we don't grow up in environments that really intentionally train us how to mature in so many areas of our life. And so we may be an adult male or female physically and intellectually, and the degrees behind our name or our careers, but we might be very immature. And I don't mean that in a condescending way. I just mean a reality of life. Like we may have failed to develop because no one showed us how or helped us develop in those areas.
You're getting into the whole idea and concept of the emotionally undeveloped man,
Yeah.
There you
which
go.
is from Why Men Struggle to Love. But if I can go back to the moment for what you just talked about with shame, that's how the inner child aspect of this all came to be. Because when I began this and started it in my practice, and again, I found 9 reasons why men abuse sex. And that's what it was. And each of them are about a particular emotional pain point. And that's what I would use. I give these guys these 2 sheets of paper and say, here are 9 things I identified. There'd be a little paragraph about all of each of them, and then say, which ones do you resonate with most? And then we work on those. Well, then there was an idea, it was a book that I read about 20 years ago. Sorry, I can't remember who the author is. I can't remember the name of the book. But what he talked about was externalizing the addiction. And talk to your addict. And then it dawned on me, you know what? One of the major problems that men have, or even women who struggle with this, is the shame factor. That is what's going to keep them in many cases from being able to manage their addiction. What if I externalize the shame? And that became the inner children. Now, it wasn't in a sense that you look at it and say, oh, there's my problem. That's the problem. If I didn't have that inner child, I wouldn't have done what I've done. No, that's not what this is. What it is, oh, that inner child, I can help manage him. And if I can manage him, I can now stay one step ahead of my addiction. And that's how the 9 inner children came to be.